Welcome to Paranormal M, the home of unexplained mysteries. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications to join us on an eerie journey through the unknown. We hope you're prepared for the supernatural. And just a public disclaimer. I've read your comments and I find the fact that you think I sound like Ryan Reynolds to be particularly hilarious. And I take the fact that you think that I'm an AI voice as a compliment. And if you hear any noises in the background, yes, there are cows around my house. There are many geckos on my walls that seem to scream at me when pretty much at the worst times. And there's a cat around, and you might hear a dog. On to the stories. Story number 1. This creepy doll I have. At least 10 years ago, probably longer, a doll was left behind at my work. The doll was made in 2004 or later. We didn't know who it belonged to, but it was one of the creepiest dolls any of us had seen. We propped it up where customers could see it, and waiting for someone to claim it. We all avoided it without really acknowledging what we were doing. Months later, and this doll is still there. My boss told me to get rid of it, but I had a better idea. He was a huge jokester, so he gave me the green light. I hid the doll at a coworker station, where she would see it, where she glanced up. It worked, and she screamed. It was pretty funny. That kicked off almost a year of us hiding it and scaring each other. Sometimes we pranked someone else, but mostly it was between the two of us. I arranged to have it make a cameo appearance at a baby shower for her first grandchild. It was awesome. Then I had her daughter wrap it up, hide it underneath the family Christmas tree. I wasn't there, but they had a good laugh. Then they started tossing the doll around, and out of nowhere, where it started to laugh. They all say, sounded like an evil laugh. We live only a mile apart, so my coworker's husband drove the doll down to my house and tossed it out of the window. On Christmas morning, no less. My coworker called and told me what happened. I tried everything, and that doll would never make another sound. I stopped the game at that point and tossed the doll in the garage. Years later, I decided to try and sell it on eBay with its backstory as a possible haunted or cursed object. Only after writing up my description, I could not find that doll. Months or years later, I stumbled across it again and put it somewhere better where I would remember where it was. When I decided again to take a shot at selling it, I again couldn't find it. So this week I spotted it and decided it would be perfect for a little project art I have. It required me to basically disassemble it. Of course, I found the voice box thing. I knew it had one. What I did not expect at all was for it to start talking. The doll talking isn't the really weird thing. But what kind of battery lasts this long? Not to mention, I've washed this doll. How can it still work? The spooky thing is that the doll hasn't laughed a single time for me. It's repeating my name over and over. Patty, Patty, Patty. Story number 2. I wasn't imagining things, right? I was 6 or 7 years old and at home with my mom. My dad had gone to drop off my sister at the nursery and then go off to work, so it was just us. We decided to play Uno together, and it was really fun. We ate snacks and just played for a couple of hours. We were about to play the final match when I suddenly needed to use the bathroom. I asked my mom if we could wait a bit because I really needed to go, and she said okay. I rushed into the bathroom and did my business, flushed the toilet, and was about to wash my hands when I saw something from the corner of my eye walk just outside the frame of the bathroom door. I turned my head to look, thinking it would just disappear, as it usually did, but it didn't. Now, there was from what it looked like, a 6'4" shadow person, standing, staring, with the widest eyes in front of me. Without looking away, I slowly walked to the sink and washed my hands. I heard something shuffle behind me, and I quickly turned my head around, terrified it would be another one. But there it was. Nothing. I whipped my head back to the doorway, and the 6'4" tall shadow man at the doorway has turned towards the kitchen and walked there, disappeared right in front of my eyes. I was horrified, frozen in place. As soon as I snapped out of it, I ran to my mom and told her what I saw while hyperventilating. She told me to wait in the living room and check the house, but there was nothing. No signs of anyone being there. She told me I was probably just seeing things, and it was just my imagination perhaps. But I know what I saw. My mom doesn't know this, but I saw him that very night. But I wasn't scared this time. I was relieved, because I wasn't imagining things. He didn't say anything to me, but I'm guessing it's because he had no mouth. I didn't move, but I closed my eyes. When I opened them, he was gone. Even to this day, I see him at the corner of my eyes. I see others too, and I've learned to live with it. Story number 3. What should I do? Growing up, I always seemed to have some sort of connection to the spiritual world. My mom would tell me it started when I was 3. I would apparently wake up with bruises. When she asked, I would say it's the scary old lady who lives with us. I've grown more accustomed to seeing them now. But something odd happened last month. I was watching my baby sister when my mother was cooking dinner. She walked into the room and asked me if I had seen any ghosts recently. I found this strange, because she would always tell me to not mention it or bring it up. Still, I answered truthfully, which was, yeah, I see them in the corner of my eye, and sometimes hear people calling me when no one did. Why? She told me. She proceeded to tell me to forget about it and went back to cooking in the kitchen. I forgot about it after that until this week. When I'm out or at home, usually in the kitchen, I always have the feeling that someone or something is watching me. I don't know if I should tell my mom or just shrug it off. I wasn't worried until yesterday when I was washing up and saw one of them standing right beside me. I was a little scared and jumped. As soon as I blinked, it was gone. I looked around the room and nothing at all. So what do I do? Should I leave it? Or should I talk to my mom about this? The ghosts I usually see are shadow people. No identifiable features except their height. And this one was about 5'6" or 7. Story number 4. Large eye that would watch my brother and I when we were younger. What are your thoughts on it? My parents bought my childhood home for my grandmother, when I was 5 years old. And the many different family members that lived here all share a unique paranormal experience that they had while staying at this home. All of the experiences ranged from seeing a full-body apparition, being held down against their will, feeling like they can't breathe, and then occasionally seeing objects move, like doors closing and photos on the wall moving. For the experience I had, my older brother also witnessed when it happened. However, when we both sit down to discuss it now as adults, we both question what we saw. When I was growing up, my mother kept my brother and I in the same bedroom in the basement, having a wooden bunk bed and our duct taped together refrigerator box full of toys. Above that box of toys was a window. Since we were in the basement, it was a window that was roughly 2 to 3 feet deep and a metal crate over the top to prevent any animals and people to get in. Occasionally, I was woken up to the sound of my blinds bent slowly, and since I was on the bottom bunk, I would have to look around the bed frame to see the window. But when I would hear the sound of the blinds being slowly bent and snapping, I would see a large growling eye that would illuminate the room. This eye had a large pupil that would track you if you looked at it, and it didn't have any other characteristics to it, like an eyelid, eyelashes, reflection, a color in the pupil, or anything to make it look human. Just a single eye, the size of an average human fist. Since the window was so small, and the window well would not allow any person to just view in like that, it was hard to say if it was a person or an animal. My parents, of course, never believed us, and we had to stay in the room. My brother had got to the point where we had thumbtacks in the ceiling so we could tack up his blanket to block the view. I would go to the extent of sleeping on the side of the mattress, practically hugging the wall. The eye never did anything other than just watch and track us if we moved. This happened to us ongoing until we moved upstairs, and then it never happened again. My brother and I will hang out during family events and talk about it often. We both still have no idea what we saw. We both experienced it at the same time, and we know we saw it. But as adults, we question it and haven't found anything close to other experiences that people have had. Story number 5. People saying my name. My parents were divorced, so I grew up in 2 houses in the UK. First house was 650 years old. Wonky floors, low doorways, servants' living area and main living area, the lot. Had many spooky situations there. Second house, 100 years old, was for sale when we bought it because the owner had died of cancer. In my house, and later found out that it was my bedroom. Thanks, Mom. I saw this man sitting on a chair in my room once when I was a child, which is when I was told about the death of the previous owner after telling my mom what I saw. Anyway, throughout my life in both of these houses, I've consistently heard someone saying my name. Not always the same voice, and sometimes it would sound like the voice of one of my living family members. I'd shout down to them to see what they wanted, and they had never called me. It happened at least once a week. 10 years later, I haven't heard it for ages. Then a few days ago, I was falling asleep in my house, built in 1838, and I clearly heard my boyfriend shout for me. I got up to see what he wanted, as he was downstairs watching TV. When I got down, he was asleep on the sofa. I thought he was messing with me, so I woke him up and it was clear that he had genuinely been asleep. Story number 6. Ghost Car. So back in 2018, I was working at a national park in Wyoming and had a friend that was coming out to work with me. Due to some errors with his bus ticket, he got stuck in some nowhere town in Utah, and I offered to come pick him up. It was around 6.5 hours of a drive, and it was a one-way. So I brought my girlfriend at the time with me to make the drive easier. Made it to the town in Utah and picked him up with no problems. It was about halfway back to Wyoming when I heard some weird shit starting. It was roughly around 1-ish in the morning, and I noticed 3 bright red lights in front of us, almost like someone hitting their brakes. It was 2 red lights with a smaller red light directly above them. As we got closer to where the lights would have been, they suddenly disappeared. I mean, completely vanished like they weren't even there. Now in the moment, I thought, okay, I'm tired, I'm probably seeing things. I'd been awake for over 20 hours at that point. It was when my buddy in the back seat leaned forward and asked me if he had also seen those lights. My girlfriend turned and said that she saw them too and asked where they went. Up until this point, it had all been well over 30 minutes since we had seen another car, as it was super late and we were on some backcountry highway. We passed where we all thought the lights had been, and there was no car, no road for a car to turn down, and there was no one around. Probably another 5 miles down the road, the lights came back. Same pattern, same brightness, same distance away. My girlfriend started freaking out and telling me to go faster and just get us back to that park. Now she didn't want to be in the car anymore, too. My buddy and I are starting to get a little bit freaked out as well. Same deal, we get to the point where the lights should have been, and there was nothing. This happened one more time before we stopped seeing the lights. The fact that this all happened, and there were other people around to experience it, made me feel a bit better. Until about a year later, it happened to me again, while I was alone. I was driving through the mountains of Colorado at probably a little after midnight, and saw the red lights. Same pattern, same brightness, and same exact distance as last time. This time I'd seen them, and I'd get closer. They'd blink out, and then almost immediately they'd reappear further down the road. That was 5 years ago. I live in Georgia now. I drive an hour one way to get to work in the mornings, and I make that drive at 3 a.m. I saw those fucking lights this morning. Anytime I tell anyone about the lights, people either don't believe me or they laugh it off as just nothing. I don't know if it's aliens or if it's a ghost car or what, but this has me spooked. I sincerely hope someone out there has experienced something like this before. Story number 7. Unmasking the Enfield poltergeist. Why we think it's not what you believe. What's your take? Nick and I recently took a comprehensive look at the Enfield poltergeist case on our podcast. We dove into every nook and cranny and came out on the other side, not entirely convinced it was actually a poltergeist. We noticed inconsistencies that don't match the traditional poltergeist profile. Prime example, the apparent intent and the level of interaction with humans, which in many instances seemed more in line with demonic entities. This led us to question the poltergeist label commonly attached to this case. If I'm being completely honest, over half of the podcast, we lean more towards it being a demonic style of haunting. There were some very weird facts that we learned, though. Prime example. The first activity in the home didn't even start until 13 years after they moved in. In addition to that, the fact that out of nowhere everything just stopped. That doesn't sound like a demonic style haunting in that regard. So we're curious to hear your thoughts. Do you believe in the Enfeld poltergeist was actually really a poltergeist? Or could it have been something else entirely? Story number 8. A mysterious light. A memory that still haunts me. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by the paranormal. I guess the thrill of the unknown always got me curious. As I grew older, some experiences stuck with me, but there's one that stands out the most. When I was a teenager, I still lived with my parents, and one night I decided to go to bed early and read a little. This was before smartphones and tablets. A high-end electronic back then was an Atari 2600. After about half an hour of reading, I switched off my lamp and lay there thinking. Suddenly, I saw a light from the corner of my right eye. At first, I thought it was my dad messing with me with a flashlight. It wouldn't have been the first time, really. Dick Dad. My room was next to the kitchen, and there was a glass window above the door. It was an old house built in the late 1800s. I realized the light wasn't coming from the small pane of glass, but from the other side of the door. My thoughts raced. Could it be an intruder? I sat up in bed, silently watching the light. It floated up the glass above the door and then moved through it into my room. But it wasn't like a normal beam of light. It was solid and didn't reflect on anything, not even the glass it passed through. Stunned, I watched the light drift through my room, go back out through the glass, and disappear. After a few minutes of pondering, I decided to check on my parents. They were asleep. My mom woke up when I knocked and said nobody had been up. It took me days to even tell her what I'd seen. As I grew older, my childhood fascination with the paranormal evolved into something more. It became a cornerstone in my life. This interest has led me to create various side adventures, each requiring hours of research and deep dives into the mysteries of the unknown. Through this research, I've come across theories about orbs. These are thought to be balls of energy, often captured in photos or videos, but sometimes visible to the naked eye. Some believe they're manifestations of spiritual energy, while skeptics argue that they're simply dust particles or lens flares. Now, if I'm being honest, I believe when I see orbs on any kind of video, 95% of the time I believe it's either dust or a bug. Even I, while out ghost hunting in the past, whenever I've seen orbs in my personal videos, I throw them away. I just don't believe there's much validity to these, as I'm a huge skeptic. They can be easily replicated using basic dust in the house. Now, there's 5% of the videos that I look at that I believe there might be something there. What I saw with my eyes that night, what intrigues me, is the theory that orbs could be a form of energy consciousness, neither fully spiritual nor physical, but something in between. Given what I saw that night, the orb theory holds a certain allure. The light I witnessed behaved unlike any ordinary beam. It didn't reflect on surfaces, but it had a tangible presence, a solidity that defies easy explanation. Could it have been an orb, a form of energy consciousness that existed, even if for a brief moment within the confines of my childhood room? While I can't say for certain, the theories I've encountered in my years of research give me pause for thought. Maybe that mysterious light was an orb, a phenomenon that both the spiritual and the skeptical have yet to fully understand. Story number 9. Was messing with Robert the doll the wrong move? Trigger warning / blood. / my neighbor's dog. This morning I read a story about Robert the doll that gave my interest. And I know has a lot of people talking too. Two well-known people in the field of exploring mysterious and spooky stuff, Kalani Smith and Exploring with Josh, decided to do something risky. They performed a ritual involving blood with Robert the doll, a famous doll that many believed is haunted. After doing this, both of them felt very bad physically and emotionally. This event has started a lot of conversations about the right and wrong ways to explore unexplained things. So what's the problem with what Kalani Smith and Exploring with Josh did? Well, there are questions about whether they thought through consequences, not just for them, but also for others who might interact with Robert in the future. Also, they shared their experiences online, which could influence other people to do similar risky things. The story has caused quite a stir online. Many people think that Smith and Josh should have been more careful. The public's reaction also highlights that even in the age of the internet where sensational stuff gets a lot of attention, people still care about doing things safely and responsibly. I think this is the biggest problem with many content creators. It can muddy the water, in my opinion. What are your thoughts? Not just this story in general, but investigators pushing the envelope. Does it push things too far? Truly interested to hear what others have to say about this. Story number 10. Ouija board extra hand. So this happened back in college, almost 13 years ago. A couple of our friends invited us to go and try the Ouija board. So we started with the lights partially off. 3 people in total decided to go ahead and join in. We started by asking normal questions about her past that the board would answer pretty accurately. In the beginning, it claimed to be the grandfather of one of the girls that was in the game. After a couple of questions, he told us that really it was someone else, even giving out his real name, unpopular name that I can't recall now. Anyhow, we closed the game and went home. Next day, one of our friends was showing us the video of our hands moving. One of our friends was recording the session. I didn't notice anything strange in the beginning, just normal hands going around the board, until one of our friends freaked out. She was like, "Wait, why are there 4 hands in the board? We were only in 3 that night." Looking at the detailed video, one of the hands was definitely bigger than ours. And because of the darkness, candlelights in the video, you couldn't see the arm. It looked like it was vanishing. The hand had a big ring on one of the fingers. None of us had rings back in the day. Also, the ring was like it was part of his finger, like part of the finger bone. Pretty creepy. We reviewed the video 100 times. We still couldn't believe it was true. We brought it to a couple of other people to check it out, and they were like, "It does not look unusual." But of course, for somebody that was not there, no one believes that we were only 3 people. Simply thought there was a 4th hand there. From this day, we never talked about that encounter with our friends. I tried recently to locate that video, but I couldn't find it. It's probably somewhere in a dead Nokia SD card somewhere. Anyhow, I don't recommend anybody to do anything with the Ouija board. It's dangerous, and who knows what it leads to and what gate it opens. Story number 12. Humanoid growling in the backyard after another strange event. Once again, another trigger warning / death warning. You've been warned. A little backstory. My father lived with us for a while, 6 months prior to passing away. Long story short, my father was a drug addict who became violent and had to be forced from our home. This led to us not speaking to him for the last few months of his life. He didn't pass away peacefully. Since his death, my family's experienced 3 more losses. Our home has become a place of constant sadness and negative energy. The last few months, we've been experiencing some strange happenings. My father installed our ceiling fan, and it has always turned itself on sporadically. After his passing, it started happening at least once a day, turning on full blast, in conjunction with the TV turning on as well. My father put a small screw in the back of the remote to keep the battery cover on. I would set the remote down on the table, turn my back, and then the TV and fan would turn back on. Sometimes it would take me turning the TV off several times for it to actually stay off. This stopped happening after my mom canceled cable and returned the remote to the provider. The ceiling fan went back to only turning on sometimes. I know this could easily be explained as an electrical or wiring issue. We have my father's ashes on top of our china cabinet, and we have some photos of him around it. The photos kept falling off with no explanation. My mom took the photos down after a framed picture of her and him fell and shattered, ruining the photo. He found the photo in storage shortly before he was removed from our home. When my partner and I are home alone, we've both heard cabinet doors slamming, the front and back doors slamming, what sounds like a drawer opening and being rummaged through, then slammed shut, chairs pushing in and out. But when investigated, no one's there. The cats and dog will be asleep in another room, or we're basically just in our sight at that time. Several times when I've showered while home alone, I'll hear voices in the house. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. The other day, I briefly saw a brown outline of a person in my kitchen. This didn't happen prior to my father's passing. Yesterday was my aunt's funeral. She passed young and suddenly. We've all taken it kind of hard, but last night my partner and I were sitting on the back porch for a few hours just talking, and as I was mid-sentence, we suddenly heard footsteps and a loud growling sound that was getting closer. We both immediately got up and ran outside. I felt this primordial sense that I was in danger. I made my heart beat fast and my hair to stand up on the back of my neck. Didn't see anything after looking around 10 minutes later, though. The growl sounded like it came from a human. The yard is fenced in, and the gate on the other side of the yard that the noise came from was locked, and the other gate was in view of us. If someone had jumped the fence, we would have heard it. We were outside for 2 hours, and my dog had been out with us. If a person had been there, she would have ran up to them. If it had been an animal, she would have been trying to run at it or alert us to it. She's a hunting breed and has done so before. We talked to my mom and she had a similar experience in the yard. We can't figure out what it could be, can't think of a plausible explanation for this. Haunted Christmas Eve. Story number 13. 10 years ago, I, a then 16-year-old female, now 26, had eaten a lot of Burger King on the 4-hour journey to my grandparents' house. When we arrived to see my Nan, it was Christmas Eve. And as I still do now when I get excited or happy, I jumped around the house, which combined with the Burger King lunch unfortunately made me really queasy. This was a sadder Christmas than usual as my grandpa had passed away earlier that year from Alzheimer's disease. But my family were determined to lift my Nan's mood with a fun and loving Christmas. Now on to the spooky bit. I decided to sleep off the self-inflicted nausea while my family just took my Nan to a local fish and chip restaurant, leaving me on my own in the bungalow that my Nan and Grandpa built themselves. I was woken up by the sound of loud music. It was the Nat King Cole song, which my Nan's favorite artist is. Being sleepy and not thinking straight, I asked my grandpa to switch it off. Immediately, the music stopped. This made me wake up properly, of course. My grandpa had passed away. Tentatively, with my heart racing, I left the bedroom and I shouted to see if the rest of the family had gone home, but they hadn't. I was still alone. I went into the living room and saw that my grandpa's stereo system, and he loved technology, had a Nat King Cole CD inside. So I unplugged the stereo and went back to bed. It wasn't long after falling into an uneasy sleep that the Nat King Cole music blared out even louder. It was so loud it was reverberating around the bungalow, and I started to cry, feeling freaked out. I yelled, "Grandpa, please turn it off. I don't feel well." And the music stopped. I didn't want to get up again, so I stayed awake until my family came back about a half an hour later. After telling my mom, she checked the stereo, and sure enough, it was unplugged. Since then, my Nan's dementia had gotten worse, and she often forgets about my grandpa, remembering only about a handsome, kind man and stroking his photo for comfort. The stereo still comes on loudly, usually when she's being difficult to care for or unpleasant, a horrible side effect of dementia. And it calms her immediately. We all think it's our grandpa. In his own sweet way, saying as he used to, "Don't worry, pet, it's all going to be all right." Story number 14. Angry Spirit Interrupts Phone Call. This happened 2 years ago, and another post jogged my memory, and I wanted to share this with you. A friend of mine was looking at houses in my city and had sent several of the online listings to me to give feedback as she was going through the process. She sent one in particular that just gave me terrible vibes. I noticed the tax history on the listing showed that it had been owned since it was built in the 1970s, up until about 2005. After that, it was purchased and sold several times, each owner only having it for about a year or so. There wasn't anything in particular I could pinpoint, other than the hideously bland beige walls that I didn't like. But the photos of the den in the living room gave me terrible vibes. All I could say is I would not look at that house if my realtor sent it to me. I told her pretty much this, and my friend admitted that something seemed odd about it to her as well. The next week I was down the street from the building. This is down the street from where I lived at the time. I was getting some lunch in a restaurant that I liked to frequent. She gave me a call. I already had my AirPods in my ears, as I was listening to music while I was eating, and I answered. She told me that she had a client meeting and didn't realize until it was over that she was only a mile or two from the home. So she had a realtor meet her there. They did a quick tour. She emphasized the quick stating that as soon as she was in the door, she regretted it. She began to describe the house and the feelings that she had in there when out of nowhere this terrible sound that was something between a growl and a human wail filled my ears. It was louder than anything my AirPods could have been able to produce, even at the loudest volume setting. It physically hurt my ears. Without thinking, I immediately grabbed them out of my ears and dropped them on the table in front of me. I had assumed it was some weird Bluetooth glitch, which can happen with wireless earbuds of any kind. When you take AirPods out, they call automatically and it switches back over to the phone, so I picked it up and said, "Sorry," to my friend. As I was basically about to explain what happened, she stopped me and said, "What the actual fuck was that?" "You heard it too?" I asked. "Yeah, it was this horrible demonic sound like an angry voice, but so much deeper and gravelly." "I thought it was just my earbuds glitching," I replied. We both took a moment and I told her that there was nothing but bad energy in that house, and she should probably run by a shop that sold sage and sage herself before driving home. Several days later, I mentioned it to a realtor friend of mine. She asked me what address it was. I didn't know, but I described the location of the house and some of the info that I had on it. She got out her laptop and was able to find it quickly. She glanced through the info, and when she saw the tax records, she said, "Yep, there's absolutely something wrong with that house. It's rare you see so many sales and resales within such a short amount of time." She also told me that while she personally doesn't believe in ghosts, she knows that things that happen in houses leave imprints. She often shows houses that have wonderful and uplifting energies and knows there's a lot of happiness and love in those houses. She also comes across homes that have very heavy and dark energies, and she knows that bad things of many kinds happened there in the past. How I may have accidentally communicated for the dead. Backstory. My sister, who was 12 at the time of the story, used to collect baby dolls. Along with it, she would also purchase real baby stuff, like baby clothes, strollers, and baby swings. This story happens to center around the baby swing. The baby swing was not of the automated ones where it rocks on its own. You physically had to push it. This story took place around when I was 8, and at the time my cousin was 11. They were staying the night. We were playing in my older brother's room since his room is bigger than ours, and he was staying at a friend's house. Note: the bathroom door was shut, so we didn't disturb my dad while he watched TV and had no windows opened in the room. My sister had set up the baby swing in the corner of the room and placed her baby doll in it. When I was younger, I was very imaginative and decided to play a game of make-believe. We started playing house, where my sister was naturally the mommy. I was the daddy, and I was their older child. As we were playing, we noticed the baby swing from the corner of our eyes at the same time start swinging on its own. Naturally, we freaked out and ran out to the living room where my dad was sitting watching the TV. We immediately told him what happened. He didn't seem too concerned, just waved it off. So we shrugged, tiptoed back to the room to see if it was still moving. Luckily, it wasn't, so we just assumed it was just our imagination. Soon as I was getting bored of playing house, we started playing another game. Still a variant of house, but darker. At this point, my sister and I were sitting on my brother's bed, and I was sitting on the bed. I started telling a story about a woman who killed her baby. Can't remember the story for the life of me, but it was pretty detailed, and I'm pretty sure it involved her drowning her baby in the bathtub. Soon the baby swing started swinging on its own again, but faster and banging into the wall. We once again freaked out and ran for my dad. As soon as we made it into the living room, we noticed my dad was watching an episode of Old Murders. The story I was telling to my cousin and my sister in my brother's bedroom was playing on the TV The exact same story with the exact same details. Nope, I didn't hear the story, and I was not repeating it as the episode aired. I don't know if a ghost was acting through me to communicate and convey the story, or if it was merely a bizarre coincidence. The whole thing was strange, and I had night terrors for weeks after. Story number 16, The Sobbing Ghost. This is something that my mom experienced and has never forgotten. When I was 4 years old, my parents, my grandmother, and I went to the country to stay in a pretty old hotel. A lot of buildings in my country are very, very old and are just constantly renovated. My Nana and I had one bedroom, and my parents stayed in another. On the first night, my mom was woken up by a pretty chilling sound, crying. She could hear a girl and a woman sobbing, and the way my mom describes it is that the woman sounded absolutely heartbroken. The horrifying part was that it was coming from somewhere in the room. My mom didn't want to move. Her heart was aching for whoever was crying, but at the same time she was searching for the person, but couldn't see anything. She didn't want to turn on the light. She was sad and terrified at the same time. And then it just stopped. My mom woke up my dad immediately. To her surprise, he hadn't heard anything. But to my mom, the sound had been as clear as day. In the morning, she told my Nana, and my Nana hadn't heard it either, and we were in the next room. My Nana said it had probably been someone out in the hallway, or maybe in the room next door, or above or below. But my mom was certain the entity had been in her room. Of course, it could have been some kind of a lucid dream or just a regular dream. But to this day, my mom is still certain that she was fully awake and fully aware. Look, it was a hotel, which is going to be full of people, so it's very possible that the sound was coming in the window from outside or something. But it still creeps me out to think that there was a presence in the room with my parents, weeping so sorrowfully. Story number 17, My First Ghost Experience. I believe in ghosts wholeheartedly. Bad ghosts, good ghosts. Ghosts that just like messing with people. All of them. My first real encounter with a ghost, I now can say I've had plenty, was when I was 10. Now, I will also preface this post by saying that I was so young then, and have told a lot of stories in my life and seen so many movies, but I guess I can't tell if it was real or not. But also old enough now to definitely tell whether ghost phenomenon has happened or not, just not back then. The house I lived in when I was younger had a ghost that we'd like to call Larry. And thinking now, I'm sure we even made jokes about it back then, but maybe he was a she and was so angry all the time because we called her Larry and mocked her all the time. Damn it, Larry. Larry's back. Larry's mad. Things like that were said when cups in the middle of the tables would fly off the cupboards. Things would be opened and closed, and our grandfather clock from my passed-away grandmother would chime randomly. Creaks on floorboards where no one was. My encounter that I am unsure of, whether it was actually real or not, at some point I tried making my real ghost encounters more scary by telling it this way and seemingly got carried away. That was when I was standing in our pantry, grabbing maybe a bowl or a cup for something. We moved my grandma's grandfather clock in there, and the space was that of a walk-in closet, not very wide, long and narrow. So keep that picture in your head. I just got done grabbing my whatever when I jumped down off the countertop, and the clock all of a sudden fell violently to the other side of the wall. like it had been pushed, to which I had to fall completely on my back to not get crushed by it. The door flung open and the chimes fell down, but it was held up by the wall. Everything just swung right above my face, dangling. Got many more stories to tell, too, that I'd love to write about because I'm into all this creepy goosebumps vibe, but also because they're true stories that happened to me, and I like sharing things about my life so other people don't feel alone. And I can actually have someone else relate to and not tell me I'm crazy or making it all up. Which is possible for that last one, but I admitted that already, so... Story number 18. Naturally, this story involves a little ghost girl. A couple of years ago, I was staying at my nephew's house for a little bit until I got back on my feet. And I've stayed here a couple of times before when I was in my teen years, and things started to click for sure after this. But my brother and sister-in-law one night was telling me all these ghost stories of all these different types of ghosts that they have in their house. And naturally, I was like, well, that's crazy. But also, holy shit. Also, really? Ghosts, I understand, are more like see and hear them to believe them yourself type of deal. But my brother doesn't scare easy, and some of these ghosts really got to him. Anyway, they told me a story about this little girl that passed away in the house, either from SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. Do your research. It's sad and insane. Or she either fell out of the top story window. From the times they have seen her, she looked to be about 3 years old. Of course, the window was in the room that I was staying in. Never felt so sad and creeped out in my whole life. She had long black hair and wore a long white dress. Of course, if that isn't a cliche, you know. But anyhow, this little girl would randomly appear before my brother and sister-in-law in the basement or in the living room asking if they wanted to play, or if they knew where her mom was. By the time they blinked, she would always be gone. The next night, not even remembering that we had this full couple-hour conversation about all the different ghosts that they have in her house, I was definitely unprepared for what was going to happen. I shit my pants and not only really wasn't able to move for hours, that's how unprepared I was. I was up at 3 a.m. and talking to my now fiancé. Again, not even ghosts on my mind at this point when I hear someone calling from downstairs for their mommy. Out of instinct, I thought it was my nephew needing help or having a bad dream. So I ran into his room where I found him asleep, snoring and all. I then could hear this little girl from downstairs crying for her mommy. I just ran back to my room and started recording on my phone. After I get into my room and start recording, I then realized that I could hear this little girl from the vents, not from where my nephew was sleeping. I was so scared I didn't sleep. She just kept repeating, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," for at least a couple of minutes. And it was by far the most surreal and intense thing I've ever heard in my life. I was a daycare teacher at the time, so hearing children in distress was something I was trained to listen for, and it was heartbreaking and scary. I waited until I heard my brother wake up and use the bathroom around 5 a.m. I was waiting by the door when I heard him come out of his room and scared the hell out of him. I showed him the video I got, and then he stayed up with me and talked some more about his ghost experiences at our house. When I got home from work, I walked into my nephew's room and asked him, "Hey, did you wake up last night crying for mommy?" He just goes, "No, it was probably the little girl." Fucking chills. My nephew was about 6 at that time, but he's dealt with this little girl his whole life. Stories my sister-in-law would tell me is that he would wake up crying with pinch marks on him or bite marks, and would say "stop" in his sleep. Going back to my teen years living in the house, I stayed in his room when he was a toddler. When he learned to say hi, I would be woken up by him saying hi or laughing. And when this incident happened to me, I started to wonder if everything I woke up to, maybe he was just talking to someone else, not at me. Laughing at me, but maybe he was laughing at someone else. Creepiest realization ever. Needless to say, I didn't sleep very well the next couple of weeks, but never heard anything after this night. I tried to show my friends the video, but it was deleted off my phone. A video that came right after this video I took the day before was of my brother, so I remembered very clearly it being right there and then, but it wasn't. Luckily, I'm smart enough to think that it would be insane to get deleted, so I saved it to multiple different devices, and yes, I still have that video. Story number 19. I think a woman tried to contact me. I think a lady tried to talk to me while I was asleep. Okay, so I suffer from lucid dreams. Turns out it could be sleep paralysis, but I don't know. But this one was different. Different because in all of my other dreams, I'm able to control my eyes, and I also wake up in a hot sweat. I did neither of those and was also talking in my head but don't remember any of it. I can always remember what I say in my lucid dreams. After heaps of thought, I also remember moving my arms, something I've never been able to do during my dreams. So I went to bed as usual and woke up slightly later than I normally would. I remember trying to get up and then must have fallen asleep before actually getting up. I quote-unquote woke up and was in my room and saw a lady in all black against my bookshelf, looking out the window. She wasn't looking at me, but looked incredibly sad, and that's the vibe I got from her, as she wouldn't look at me at all. It kind of looked like she was in some sort of shawl or something that would cover her head in a long black dress. I then woke up a few minutes later and have been dwelling on the encounter ever since. I don't really know what to think, but as someone who absolutely loves ghosts and everything paranormal, this is right up my alley. I'm just wondering if there's something I should do or not do. I'm thinking of heading to the library and doing some research if that's something I can do. If she's sad, then I could try to help her. My roommates also found some writing on the fence posts outside, but I still need to venture out and find them. Story number 20. My 2-year-old nephew saw a ghost, and it was pretty scary. So a few months ago, I was tasked with babysitting my nephew, as his mom had to work late. I did his normal bedtime routine. I've done this tons of times in the same room, so it was nothing new. I put him to bed and read him his book, then left to turn off the lights. When I did that, he immediately started crying, so I came back to see if he was okay. When I asked him what was wrong, he started pointing at the roof in one particular spot. I asked him if something was there. He said yes. So I figured he wasn't going to sleep in his bed that night, so me and him crashed on the couch together and he managed to sleep just fine. He was incredibly shaken up and wouldn't stop clinging to me like something was going to hurt him. The next day I spoke to his mom, and turns out that an uncle died years and years ago, but visits on occasion. That's probably what he saw. Now this was a few months ago, but yesterday I was FaceTiming with his mom, who said that he had come back and is now disturbing the whole house. And so she's trying to basically have the place saged. And if that fails, hire someone to get rid of the ghost. As from what I gathered, her kids could be in danger from what this spirit has been doing. Sucks, as I love ghosts, but her family could be in danger because he's been starting to throw things and making her kids wake up at random hours during the night. Story number 21. I think ghosts like me, and I don't know if that's bad or not. I've always loved ghosts and ghost-like things. I would watch ghost movies with the curtains drawn and the lights off, and then sleep perfectly fine that night. My dream job as a kid was a ghost hunter. Ghost 1. One of the houses I rented with my roommate was definitely haunted, but it never really bothered me, and my roommate never noticed. I always felt like I was being watched, and that something was there when there was nothing. One day I was lying in bed on my phone and thought I saw something, so I looked up and saw a black shadow float from my door to my shelf and vanish. I wasn't scared and just went back on my phone. Ghost 2. Moved into a new place and felt that my room was warmer, especially warmer than the other rooms. Now, for some context, that house was it was an old doctor's office for the psychiatric hospital close by. The psychiatric hospital had been shut down for years. I remember laying in bed about to go to sleep when I saw her. She was beautiful and was floating on her side. When I saw her, something happened, and I saw a bus crash in my mind, almost like she was speaking to me. My friend did some research, and a bus crash did happen close to where I was. Made a whole lot more sense and made the whole experience more crazy. We don't know if this girl was on that bus, but it was still an eerie experience. I let her be as she was harmless, but I think it was because she liked me, as my other roommate's stuff was often moved and thrown around. She got woken up a few times. Never had that stuff happen to me. I did treat the ghost with respect and told her she was beautiful as often as I could. Now to my most recent house. I've posted about this one before in a different sub. But for now, Ghost 3. So I had a dream. I don't really know what to call it. I kind of woke up to find a lady in all black with a shawl on. She was very sad and wouldn't stop looking out the window. I never got to see her face and I didn't get to talk to her. I'm kind of mad that I didn't say anything. I then woke up properly the next morning to this feeling of utter strange. I also got a vibe that she lost her baby or child or something. After talking to my friend who knows heaps about spirits, she told me it's probably a demon who's tricking me, so I got some sage and I'll be doing that. I also wrote down some pages from the Bible. This lady also likes to sit next to me and sit on top of me every night. They say, or rather I say, you do not have permission to enter me in the name of Jesus Christ. The first time I said it, my entire left side went cold, like I just walked into a freezer cold, and my right side was fine, so I knew she was next to me. Some mornings are incredibly difficult to get up, and I have issues breathing, almost like somebody's on top of me. Sometimes I think she watches me play Grand Theft Auto, because I feel her when I'm playing that. Someone is guarding my roommate's door. So to give some context, to get to the bathroom from my room, you need to walk past my friend's bedroom door. About a week ago, I was heading back into my room and was sure I saw a figure standing at her door. I was so sleepy, I brushed it off and went to bed. Here's the thing. I've been seeing them every night whenever I get up to use the bathroom. So I figure now it's probably not sleep-deprived me seeing stuff. So last night I spoke to them. I don't know the gender, so I'm using them. And I told them that they could chill in my room if they wanted to, and they didn't need to protect the door anymore. And when I said that, I felt someone walk into my room, and I figured they stayed. They must have not really, as my ghost or demon might have made them leave, Kinda sucks. I actually now think that they're protecting my friend against something, but I don't know. And if they are, it could be the demon living in my room, as this person is pretty evil and enjoys making me sick. I'm not mentioning any of this to my friend, as she's incredibly scared by this stuff and hates me talking about it. I absolutely love it, and it puts me to sleep, but she can't stand any ghost talk. Story number 23. My first experience seeing something. To this day, I have no clue how or what. I was 7 years old, and the memory of it down to the last detail is etched in. I was sleeping next to my mom and happened to wake up in the middle of the night to see a little boy dressed in a white shirt, blue shorts, similar to a typical school uniform of primary school boys, enter the room. It didn't quite faze me at that point for some reason, but made me wonder who this could be. My first thought was that it was my cousin of the same age, but he wasn't even in the same city. The boy came in and walked toward the wall on the left side of the room. Toward the top of that wall was a Jesus picture, the modern-day white Jesus type. And to the left was a suitcase on top of which was my favorite stuffed teddy. The boy stood next to the suitcase and seemed to stare at the Jesus picture above him, so I could see his back. I woke my mom up and pointed at the boy, asking her who the boy was. She said there was no one there. That was when it hit me. I screamed and pretty much had the entire house up, my sisters and grandparents. I was wailing away in fear, trying to convince my mother that the boy was right there and I could still see him. My mother then asked me to close my eyes for a while and check again, which I did. He was still there and my wailing and screaming continued. Then she said she'd pray for me, which she did. After maybe a couple of minutes, I checked again, and the boy was gone. At one point, I seemed to remember seeing something whitish dripping off the boy's face. That bit's quite hazy. It's difficult to say whether it was a hypnotic hallucination or what, but the whole ordeal lasted for at least 15 minutes while I was up and continued to see the boy throughout it. Story number 24. Light switches switching on by themselves. Haven't had all that many paranormal experiences, except for like 3 or 4. One of which was the most vivid that I've described in a previous post. This one was the last that I experienced. Maybe there's some natural explanation, faulty wiring or something, but it doesn't quite make sense. So, here goes. My entire family once went for a relative's funeral in the countryside, about 5 or 6 hours away from the city where I lived. The funeral was to take place the following morning, so we stayed overnight. In the morning, I decided to take the bus back home myself, without staying on for the funeral. It was around midday when I got home, and I hit the sack immediately. A couple of hours later, I woke up and the lights were on. Obviously, I didn't switch them on before going to bed, because it was broad daylight and no one was in the house but me. Didn't think much of it, so I switched them back off and went back to sleep, only to wake up to the same thing again. It was either the same night or the following night, don't quite recall. I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. to the lights being on. This time I thought that maybe I was sleepwalking or something. So I switched them off, went back to sleep, woke up again exactly half an hour later to find the lights were on again. Just in my room. At this point, I was too freaked out to go back to sleep. This continued to happen until I became numb to it. But this made me realize how it used to happen all the time, even when I was a kid, where I was so sure I'd switched off the lights, but would wake up to my mom yelling at me for leaving them on. I always thought that I probably forgot to switch them off. And this was still the case. Different houses, though. It became so predictable every night that one night before going to bed, I called my mother and asked my sister to switch the lights in front of her so she'd know that it wasn't me, just in case they were on the next morning. Like clockwork, the next morning, they were on. I grew numb to it, where over time it just made me curious more than scared. For years now, nothing's happened, until the same thing happened last night. I don't even live in the same country anymore, but it's quite possible that it could have been just me switching it on for something in the night. That's the end of tonight's stories. Hope to see everybody tomorrow. See ya. Story number 24. Light switches switching on by themselves. Haven't had all that many paranormal experiences, except for like 3 or 4. One of which was the most vivid that I've described in a previous post. This one was the last that I experienced. Maybe there's some natural explanation, faulty wiring or something, but it doesn't quite make sense. So, here goes. My entire family once went for a relative's funeral in the countryside, about 5 or 6 hours away from the city where I lived. The funeral was to take place the following morning, so we stayed overnight. In the morning, I decided to take the bus back home myself, without staying on for the funeral. It was around midday when I got home, and I hit the sack immediately. A couple of hours later, I woke up and the lights were on. Obviously, I didn't switch them on before going to bed because it was broad daylight and no one was in the house but me. Didn't think much of it, so I switched them back off and went back to sleep, only to wake up to the same thing again. It was either the same night or the following night, don't quite recall. I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. to the lights being on. This time, I thought that maybe I was sleepwalking or something. So I switched them off, went back to sleep, woke up again exactly half an hour later to find the lights were on again. Just in my room. At this point, I was too freaked out to go back to sleep. This continued to happen until I became numb to it. But this made me realize how it used to happen all the time, even when I was a kid, where I was so sure I'd switched off the lights, but would wake up to my mom yelling at me for leaving them on. I always thought that I probably forgot to switch them off. And this was still the case. Different houses, though. It became so predictable every night that one night before going to bed, I called my mother and asked my sister to switch the lights in front of her so she'd know that it wasn't me, just in case they were on the next morning. Like clockwork, the next morning, they were on. I grew numb to it, where over time it just made me curious more than scared. For years now, nothing's happened, until the same thing happened last night. I don't even live in the same country anymore, but it's quite possible that it could have been just me switching it on for something in the night. That's the end of tonight's stories. Hope to see everybody tomorrow. See ya.